Kurds at the top. The Lebanese map, Shiites at the bottom, of course. Shiites on the right-hand bit. Then some Druze, Sunni, Beirut, Sunni and Christian Maronite and Christian Orthodox. Then more Maronites. Then a few Shiites. Then Sunnis around Tripoli. Why do we do this? Why do we chop these people up all the time like this? The front cover of Time magazine, page 30 is the lead story. Sunnis and Shiites, why do they hate each other? I mean, if I could draw you a map of Washington, black, white, front lines, yeah, I could. And you can draw maps of Brooklyn if you wanted to. I can draw maps of Birmingham in England. Muslim, non-Muslim, because we don't have many Christians left in Britain now. I can draw you maps of Toronto. You know, a front line runs Mississauga. Colour it green on the left, right? Or Montreal. At one point, the front line between French Canadians and English Canadians runs down the metro track line. I mean, under the road, right? But we don't print those maps. And the Washington Post will not print those maps. It's only the other people we remember and we try to chop up and divide. Why do they hate each other? The British Army, when I was in Northern Ireland for 5 years, the British Army had sectarian maps, coloured. And the Catholic areas, Falls Road, Ardoyne, they were coloured green, of course. And the Protestant areas, Newtonards Road, Shankill Road, they were coloured orange. And then the British Army had a problem. There were several middle-class mixed areas. And they were coloured a pale brown, the colour of a fine, dark sherry. But we do this, you see, but not with our precious societies. So, look, somebody wants a civil war in Iraq. Somebody is dividing the Sunnis and the Shias. But how come, when the Sunnis and the Shias of Iraq fought together for Saddam and never had a mutiny, fighting for 8 years against Shiite Iran, they stayed together, but now they want to kill each other? Look, I'll just say two things to you. In August of 2003, I was in the Green Zone, listening to one of these boring press conferences, and one of the American occupation spokesmen, I think it was called OHRA then before it became something else, was giving a press conference. He suddenly said, you know, the danger here would be a civil war. And I went, what? We'd never heard that word before. No Iraqi had ever used the word civil war. What were they doing? Trying to frighten the Iraqis into obedience by fearful civil war, civil war, civil war. You know, I'm very struck by the fact that there are now an approximate 120,000 Western mercenaries in Iraq. That's getting pretty close to the total US military contingent. Who do they work for? Ministry of Interior. Organizations we have no knowledge of, no rules. Many of them wear hoods, masks when they're going about their job. They're South African. Northern Ireland, some of them. Britain, Australia. Some of them American, of course. Quite a lot are American. What are they doing? What is their role? What is their job there? I'm not saying mercenaries are trying to start a civil war. If I knew that, I'd print it. But something is not right about our reporting. And one of the dangers is, in Baghdad now, it's very difficult to go out and report. One of the great frustrations, as my colleague Patrick Coburn, your uncle, said in a piece in my paper the other day, the great frustration is you hear Blair says things are getting better. And to prove he's wrong, you have to go into the countryside and have your throat cut. And then he'd say, poor Patrick, I suppose, or poor Bob, you know. But no, of course there are differences, as there are between Protestants and Catholics, and you have all kinds of religious groups, Christian and otherwise, in this country. But I don't think that's what it's about. I think that's what we want to persuade you it's about. And that's not the case.
I'll start going through these questions.
Give us a couple.
I'll give you half of them. How about that? You've answered some of them already. I can see that.
We want horrible questions, not nice ones.
Let me ask you, as I did ask a Hillary...
It's a conspiracy theory one. Sorry, Laura.
As I did ask a Hillary Clinton question, just to be a little bit fair.
Yeah.
We're about to go into a season here, help us, of presidential electioneering, in which everybody on the Democratic side will do as, no doubt do as Barack Obama did yesterday or 2 days ago, and say that he's committed to peace in the Middle East and that must begin with security for Israel. What would you have an ideal candidate say?
That peace in the Middle East relies upon the security of all the people who live there.
Did you get that?
You know, about, must have been just over a year before 9/11, 2000, I was doing a broadcast, an interview on CBC television out of Toronto. And I was being fairly pessimistic, and the interviewer said, but surely, Bob, you're being too pessimistic. You know, I mean, peace is breaking out. Israel has peace with Egypt, peace with Jordan. I said, hang on. You're doing the same thing again. Peace in the Middle East always has to hinge upon Israel's status in that peace. But there are other problems elsewhere. And it isn't just Israel. There are other people. It's all the people of the Middle East deserve justice, including the Israelis, and security, including the Israelis, but all the people. But you see, in a sense, what Obama is doing, he's drawing the sectarian map, isn't he? They come first, they come second. That's the problem.
Did you get that, candidates out there? Okay. Here's a question for you. Why is there no Islamist peace movement, or at least not one covered by the media?
Okay. I've lived in the Middle East for 31 years, and I live in a Muslim part of Beirut, in effectively a country which has a Muslim majority, even though the Christians, of course, the confessional system, hold the presidency. Look, I think there are many failings of Islam as a political institution. The patriarchal society, the position of women, the endless justifications from the Quran or the Hadith. By the way, I think that you can go through all old texts, Torah, Bible, Hadith, and find enough excuses for mass murder and ethnic cleansing if you want. But yes, I think that Islam as a political institution is deeply flawed, and the most serious problem is that there is no serious questioning or reinterpretation, not just of Islam as a religion, but of Islamic history. And this is the greatest, and Muslims who are well-educated or who understand this, they'll admit it freely. I think that in the recent history of the Muslim world, for the last 300 or 400 years I'm talking about, there's always been this fear of the encroachment of the West, not without reason, one might add. And when the enemy is at the gates, it is not the right moment for self-questioning. You don't start questioning the status of God or the prophets when the first shell is coming over. And for that reason, you've got this pyramid of dictators, which we love. We love these dictators because they control their people, not represent them, control them. But I think that as long as you have this massive system of injustice, torture chambers, dictators, most of whom are our friends. Saddam was our friend for a long time. We gave him the gas, remember. As long as you have this system, you cannot have a movement talking about freedoms, because the dictators won't allow that, because the freedoms might not include them as the leader. This is the problem in Egypt. In Egypt, you cannot meet publicly as a group without official permission, which you're not going to get, unless, of course, you're in the National Democratic Party or whatever. So what do? You meet underground. Where can you meet underground? In the mosque. Therefore, you have Islamist terror, and you're away again. I don't see, I look for, in Lebanon, after all, let's face it, Sunni Muslims and Druze and Shiites demanded the withdrawal of the Syrians because they wanted more freedoms. And up to a point, they got it. In my local restaurant, the Spaghetteria, when the Syrians were in Beirut, every time you talk politics, you would do this. And now you just do this. It's better. It's better. But that is not freedom in the Islamic world. No, I think there's, I was trying to explain to a person on a radio show out of Illinois today, who was going on about the intransigence of Islam, that, you can go there into the Islamic world and see many things which are very admirable. The love of families for each other, the fact that an old person, man or woman, grandparents, great-grandparents who are dying or sick, they're not shunted off to a nursing home and visited once a week by their granddaughters. They're kept in the home, looked after in the home, and they die in their own home where they lived, which is what used to happen in the United States and Britain before we invented our lovely health services, which allows us to shunt our old and sick outside the house. Things like this, you realize, obviously have a religious background, the idea of the family being a special. But I know families were special to fascists, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about human beings treating their own family as we would wish to be treated when we grow old and sick, but we might not be treated, So I think that there are elements like that you have to remember when you dig for the very real flaws in Islam and when you say, why are there no freedoms? I know Muslim intellectuals, journalists who've spoken out. Many of them have been locked up. One or two of them have been blown up in their own cars. Sama Qasir in Lebanon. I get very quickly to the scene of bombings in Lebanon. George Harvey, former head of the Communist Party, Pierre Jamal, Phalanges, people who speak out die. So it doesn't happen here. No, it doesn't happen here, full stop. Not yet is not good enough.
the West, obviously, or maybe the West is a cliche, kind of like the Arab world is a cliche.
The West, you're trying to say the Christian world, but you can't for obvious reasons, because there aren't many Christians left.
What I was going to say was...
The Western Islam.
DC, once it was Britain, now it's DC, I guess, is all for the will of the people as long as the will of the people agrees with them. That's part of what you were talking about. The will of the people in this country is wanting troops out, and wanting troops out soon. Now, many of us. One of the questions from the audience here is, what do you think would happen if the U.S. forces left Iraq? And then I would ask you, what do you think the U.S. movement that wants that resolve wants that end, needs to grapple with, needs to deal with?
Look, I don't use email, please note, or the internet, but I get about 250 to 300 real letters a week, and usually at least half of them in one form or another, and about 40-50% are from the United States, say, how can we make our voice heard? We vote for our candidates, they go to Congress, and they don't do what we want them to do. Same in Britain. We call up our MP, he doesn't want to talk to us. We are against the war. 1 million people against the war, marching the streets of London. Blair doesn't care. There was a Marine officer in San Diego when I gave a lecture there a couple of years ago. He talked about a fraudulent democracy in which it's all there, you can use it and you can vote, but it doesn't actually produce what you want. And it is a great danger because in Britain, for example, the present New Labour government, under Blair, under new leadership of Gordon Brown perhaps, I don't think it cares what the British people think. It's got power, that's enough, we'll do what we want now, we'll tell you about it later. And that's become, I don't think that was always the case. I don't think that was the case under Roosevelt, Truman, Churchill, Eden, etc. in Britain, although Eden did go to Suez against the will of the people in 1956. So, you know, I'm not sure how you deal with what I think the cliche is the democratic deficit. I don't know how you deal with this except perhaps by, I suppose, you know, you have your demonstrations, but it doesn't make any effect still, does it? Maybe before elections there should be more serious conversations with candidates, I'm not sure. But what would happen if the Americans left? Look, all occupying powers have to negotiate with their enemies, and the enemy is not the Iraqi government or Iran or Syria, it is the insurgency. You know, forget Al-Qaeda. The Iraqis will have to deal with Al-Qaeda. But they will have to talk directly to the insurgents. In little ways, they already are. There are little deals done in Mosul. You know, Marine sergeant says, don't fire a mortar tonight, we won't check that street. And it kind of keeps it quiet. Fine. Or the Brits do the same, by the way. The Brits have an agreement in Amara, the famous Kut al-Amara of Lord Blair, that they will only drive one armoured convoy through the town every afternoon at 2 p.m. on condition there are no mortars fired into the British base. That's the occupation of Amara. So we're getting there. The largest insurgent Sunni group sent a statement to us, The Independent. I printed it on our front page 3 weeks ago now. It was the first coherent, highly ambitious demands from an insurgent group in Iraq. They demanded open public talks between insurgent leadership and the US ambassador in Baghdad, Khalilzai now, of course, Khalilzai, and with the US army commander in Iraq. They wanted the US government to disown the Iraqi government, which of course they're not going to do, but it always starts this way. They had a whole series of very complex, and I thought quite intelligent, I mean intelligent in the sense that they thought it through, demands on the hand back to Iraqi sovereignty of oil and the oil reserves, that they couldn't be sold off. They knew what was going on, in other words. And a large series of claims for compensation of damage, etc., etc. Now, okay, this is unrealistic, you may say, but the fact of the matter is that when the French began to deal directly with the Front de Libération Nationale, the FLN, the insurgent groups in Algeria, the FLN began with almost similar demands. The French wanted to hang on to the gas fields in southern Algeria and areas of the desert that they could explode nuclear weapons in, because you can't do that in France, can you? And the FLN said, no, you can't have the gas field, we're going to keep them. And so it began. Of course, eventually we ended up at Evian, and the French left. So here is an insurgent statement which clearly was putting forward a non-violent solution, not to our liking, not solution whose list could be met by a US administration or a British one now, today, no. But you could see that there were ways in. It was an opening saying, do you want to talk to us? And we will talk. We weren't going to talk, remember, to the IRA. Of course we did. Now they're going to be in the government, probably, with Ian Paisley. We weren't going to talk to the Viet Cong. And then the North Vietnamese sat down in Paris with us, with you.